And good afternoon, everyone. This is Patrick, and welcome back to Underdog Dueling, where we take a look at hidden gems and archetypes that people might be sleeping on and compare the relevance to today's meta. So as always, I have another deck profile for you guys, and this one is a really unique hybrid that utilizes two different mechanics, one of which that has been kind of forgotten about for a very long time, and that is Chemicritter Dark World. So to kind of split things up, Chemicritters are a series of Gemini monsters. Gemini monsters are an old type of monsters that count as normal monsters with no effects while on the field or in the graveyard. The way they gain their effects is when they are normal summoned again. If it's already on the field, you can give up your normal summon to be able to have it gain its effects, and all of the Chemicritters have effects to where they can either summon out a monster, protect your monsters, be able to modulate their levels, or be able to destroy your opponent's monsters. We also run a few bits of generic Gemini support, just help the strategy along. And then the other half of this is Dark Worlds, which are a series of fiend monsters that gain effects when they are discarded by a card effect, and some of them have the ability to gain an additional effect when discarded by your opponent's card effect. So it potentially allows them to get two effects off in one turn. Usually this can involve destroying a card on the field and or summoning them. I'm mostly using this as this deck is a bit of a fusion Xyz summon mix, and the levels that we have in here are 2, 4, 6, and 8, with the Chemicritters being 2 and 8s, and then the Dark World monsters being a combination of level 4s, 6, and 8. And this is just kind of a good way to bridge the gap so that we can get a wide range of monsters out onto the field. But let's go ahead and get started. And if you want to see more, please remember to like and subscribe and follow me on Twitter at Soren's Lair. So going into our deck profile, we're just going to quickly go over all of our Gemini monsters, as well as their effects when they are Gemini summoned. Starting off with 3 copies of Chemicritter Carbo Crab, who can send a Gemini monster from the deck to the grave, and then add a Gemini monster from your deck to your hand. 3 Oxyox, who can special summon a Gemini monster from your hand, and then match its level until the end of the turn. 2 Hydronock, who can discard a card, and then target a Gemini monster in the graveyard and special summon it. 2 Polychemicritter Dioxogre, who makes it to where the normal summon of a Gemini monster can't be negated, and you can banish one Gemini monster in your graveyard to target one card on the field and destroy it. And then finally, just the 1 Polychemicritter Hydreigon, who grants 500 attack and defense whenever a Gemini monster is normal summoned. And if a Gemini monster would be destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy one other card you control instead. And now for some of the more generic Gemini monsters that we run, I have 2 copies of Evocator Avec, who can target a Fire Warrior monster or a Gemini monster in your graveyard and special summon it whenever this card is normal or special summoned in any capacity. And then finally, 2 copies of Red Eye's Archfiend of Lightning, who, once per turn, can destroy all monsters your opponent controls with defense less than this card's attack, which is 2500. Then moving on to our Gemini spells, I have 3 copies of Catalyst Field, which is our field spell, which allows the additional normal summon of a Gemini monster once per turn, and can also make it to where 1 level 5 or higher Gemini monster can be normal summoned without tributing. Furthermore, you can banish 1 Gemini monster that has gained its effects until the end of your opponent's turn, and then target a card on the field and destroy it, giving you some good protection if you want to save some of your monsters for a later date. Then we got 3 Dimer Synthesis, which can either add a Catalyst Field from deck to hand, or 1 Burnout and 1 Chemicritter monster to the hand. Then, this card can also be banished, target 2 monsters on the field. One of those monsters becomes 0 attack, and then the second monster you control gains that much attack. But they both have to be Gemini monsters that have gained their effects, and it's just a really good way to beat over any monsters that might be giving you trouble. We then have 2 copies of Supervise, which is an equip spell that can only be equipped to a Gemini monster, and gives it its effects, and if it is sent to the graveyard in any capacity, you can target 1 normal monster in your graveyard and special summon it. And then we got 2 copies of Super Polymerization, which discards a card for cost, but then fusion summons a monster using materials from either side of the field, and neither player can activate cards or effects in response to this card. Basically, if your opponent has monsters on the field that meet the fusion material requirements, you can use them to try and get rid of some problem monsters, and then summon out a really big boss monster straight away. Then for the traps, we got 2 Gemini Ablation, who can, during the main phase, discard 1 card and then either summon out a Gemini monster from the deck and give its effects, or tribute a Gemini monster and special summon a Fire Warrior monster from your hand or your deck, and then if you tributed a Gemini monster that has gained its effects, you get to destroy 1 card on the field. And then finally, we've got 2 copies of Burnout, who can banish 1 face-up Chemicritter monster you control, and then summon out 2 more from the deck with different names. And then, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, when your opponent declares a direct attack against your life points, you can target 1 of your banished Gemini monsters and special summon it, and it becomes an effect monster through and through. Next, moving on to our Dark World selection, I have 2 copies of Salamander Catalyzer, who can be summoned by revealing it and 1 Fiend monster in the hand, and then discarding the other card. So, depending on what you want, you can either get him on the field for a possible rank 4 or a link play, or grab one of our Dark World cards off of their effects and special summon them. And then, if a monster is destroyed by battle involving one of my Fiend monsters while this card is in the graveyard, you can add the card to your hand. This is just a really good extender to help get our Dark Worlds in rotation. We then have 2 copies of Beige, Vanguard of Dark World, who is special summon when discarded to the graveyard by a card effect. 2 Lucent, Netherlord of Dark World, who special summons itself when discarded, but then can summon out a Fiend monster from your deck from either field if your opponent is the one that sent it from hand to grave. And then 2 copies of Grapha, who can special summon itself from the graveyard by returning a Dark World card on the field to the hand, and if this card was sent to the graveyard, you target 1 card on the field and destroy it. Then if it was your opponent that did the discard, you get to look at 1 random card in your opponent's hand, and then if it's a monster, you can special summon it to your field. And then finally, we've got our Dark World Spells and Traps. Starting with 2 copies of Dark World Accession, is a quick play spell that allows you to fusion summon a Fiend fusion monster by banishing materials from your field or your graveyard. However, if fusion summoning a Dark World monster using this card, you can also discard cards from the hand to the graveyard to meet the requirements for the fusion summon. And then during your main phase, if this card is in the graveyard, you can add it to your hand and discard 1 Dark World monster. By sending the cards from your hand to the graveyard, you can trigger their effects and summon them out, so that way you can not only get your fusion monster out on the field, but you can also get all of your Dark World cards for further plays. We then have 2 copies of Dark World Puppetry, which is a quick play spell that can target up to 3 cards in either graveyard, and banish them, then discard a Fiend monster. And then during the main phase, except the turn this card was sent to the graveyard, you can banish this card from your graveyard, then target 1 of your banished monsters, and add it to your hand. However, you can only activate 1 Dark World Puppetry per turn. And then we have 2 copies of Dark World Dealings, which simply lets each player draw 1 card and then discard 1 card, which pairs very nicely with all of our other Dark Worlds. And then lastly, we have 2 copies of Dark World Punishment. It is a counter trap that can negate the summon of a normal or special summon monster, destroy it, and then discard 1 Fiend monster. And then if a Dark World monster you control would be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can banish this card from your graveyard instead. And this is just a really good way to punish our opponent from being able to go into their plays. So all in all, this strategy just revolves on trying to get as much material in the graveyard as possible to trigger on their effects. But let's go ahead and move on into our extra deck, starting off with our fusions. We have 1 Starving Venom Fusion Dragon, which requires 2 dark monsters on the field except tokens, and when fusion summoned, it gains the attack of 1 opponent's special summon monster until the end of the turn, and then once per turn you can target a level 5 or higher monster that your opponent controls, copy both its name and its effect, potentially giving you an advantage depending on whatever they might have, and if this fusion summon card is destroyed, you can destroy all of your opponent's special summon monsters. Next, we have one Protoplant Dragostapella, which requires a fusion monster and one dark monster as material. And once per turn, you can target one face-up monster your opponent controls, place a predator counter on it, and if it's level 2 or higher, it becomes level 1 as long as it has one of these counters, and it negates the activated effects of monsters with predator counters. This is basically just a good way to prevent your opponent from synchro or Xyz summoning very easily, and occasionally fusion summoning because of the level modulation. And then we got one Protoplant Trivioveratum, which requires 3 dark monsters on the field. It gains attack equal to the original attack of all other monsters on the field with a predator counter. And then once per turn, you can choose one of the following effects. When your opponent would special summon a monster from the extra deck, you can negate the activation and destroy that monster. And then if your opponent controls a monster with a predator counter, you can special summon this card from your graveyard in defense position. It's kind of a really good way to close out games and pairs very well with Dragostapella because it does add a predator counter. These 3 are kind of the main trifecta that we kind of want to use with super polymerization because they have the most generic materials. And then we got one First of the Dragons, which requires 2 normal monsters as material. It must be fusion summoned and can't be special summoned in either ways, and you can only control one First of the Dragons. This card can't be destroyed by battle except by battle with a normal monster, and is unaffected by other monsters' effects. Basically, you do have to have normal monsters on the field, so this is kind of a good way if you haven't used up your normal summon yet and none of them are effect monsters. Now we do have possible ways of summoning out from the graveyard, but I currently don't have it in this deck as of yet. But this card just makes for a really good wall, because it can sit in defense position, as it can't be touched by monster effects, requiring your opponent to use spell or trap effects, or find a way to negate all of its effects. So if you need to rebuild your resources, this is a really good card to have. And then finally, I've got one Grapha, Dragon Overlord of Darkworld, which requires Grapha, Dragon Lord of Darkworld, and one Dark Monster. And when your opponent would activate a monster effect or a spell or a trap card, while I have cards in the hand, the activated effect becomes your opponent discards 1 card, your opponent meaning you. So if your opponent tries to interrupt your plays, you get a free discard, potentially setting up all of your plays. However, you can only use this effect once per turn. And if this fusion summon card leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon one Grapha, Dragon Lord of Darkworld, that is banished or in your graveyard, and then each player with a hand discards 1 card. Now moving on to our Xyz monsters, I am running one Onibimaru Soul Sweeper, which requires 2 or more level 2 monsters, and you can detach 1 material from this card, then target 1 monster your opponent controls and banish it until your opponent's end phase. And if this card and its owner's control is destroyed by an opponent's card, you can target banished monsters up to the number of materials this card had and shuffle them into the deck. We have one number 60, Dugaros the Timeless, which can detach 2 materials to either skip your next draw phase, allowing you to draw 2 cards, then discard 1 card, skip your next main phase 1, and special summon a monster from the graveyard in defense position, or skip the battle phase of your next turn and double the attack of 1 monster you control until the end of this turn. We then play 1 copy of Evil Swarm Exciton Knight, and once per chain during your main phase or your opponent's battle phase, if your opponent has more total cards in their hand and on the field than you do. As a quick effect, you can detach 1 material from this card and destroy all other cards on the field, but your opponent takes no further damage this turn. Then we play 1 copy of DDD Wave High King Caesar, who requires 2 level 6 Fiend monsters as material, and when a spell, trap, or monster effect is activated that includes an effect that summons a monster, you can detach 1 material to negate the activation, and if you do, destroy that card. Now, this does have another effect that focuses on the DD archetype. However, this is the only card of that archetype that we do run, so we can't use its other effect, but this is just a good way to slow down our opponent. We then have 1 copy of number 24, Dragulus the Vampiric Dragon, who once per turn can detach a material from itself, then target a monster on the field that was summoned from the extra deck and change it to face down defense position. And if this card and its owner's control is sent to the graveyard or banished by your opponent's card effect, you can special summon this card in face down defense position, and if this card is flipped face up, send 1 card on the field to the graveyard, which is the best removal a card can have. Next, we have Chemicritter Method Draco, who is kind of our main boss monster for the Gemini strategy, as it requires 2 level 8 Gemini monsters. And when this card is Xyzed Summon, you can target 1 Gemini monster in your graveyard and special summon it, and while this card has Xyzed material, monsters your opponent controls can't target Gemini monsters you control for attacks. Also, your opponent can't target Gemini monsters you control with card effects. And when a Gemini monster would be normal summoned, you can detach 1 material from this card and make your opponent send 1 card from their hand or their field to the graveyard, their choice. Then finally, we have kind of a trifecta of cards that play very well together, starting off with number 97 Draglubian, which makes it to where your opponent cannot target this card with card effects. You can detach 1 material from this card and take 2 dragon number monsters with different names from your extra deck and or graveyard, except a copy of itself, special summon 1 of them and attach the other to it as material. But for the rest of the turn, you cannot summon other monsters or declare an attack except with that special summon monster. So our 2 main options that we want to go into with this is number 38, Hope Harbinger, Dragon Titanic Galaxy, and number 100, Numeron Dragon. So Hope Harbinger can, once per turn, negate the activation of a spell card or effect that is activated and attach it to this card as material. And then when an opponent's monster declares an attack, you can detach 1 material and change the attack target to this card and perform damage calculation, giving you a little bit of built-in protection. And if another Xyz monster you control is destroyed by battle or by card effect, you can target a face-up Xyz monster you control and it gains attack equal to one of those destroyed monster's original attack. And then Numeron Dragon can detach a material from this card and gain 1,000 attack equal to the combined ranks of all Xyz monsters currently on the field times 1,000 until the end of the turn, until the end of your opponent's turn. And when this card is destroyed by a card effect, you can destroy as many monsters on the field as possible, then each player sets 1 spell or trap from their graveyard to the field. And when an opponent's monster declares an attack while this card is in your graveyard and you have no cards in your hand or on the field, you can special summon this. Ideally, what you want to do is use Draglubian's effect to get Numeron Dragon with Hope Harbinger as material, because with these 2 out on the field, Numeron Dragon can get up to 9,000 attack and either attack directly if your opponent has nothing to protect them, or be able to just dish out a lot of damage and potentially kill your opponent in 1 turn. Then our last Xyz monster is just kind of a way to wrap things up, and it is Divine Arsenal AA Zeus Sky Thunder. And once per turn, if an Xyz monster battled this turn, you can also Xyz summon Zeus using 1 Xyz monster you control as material, and its materials are transferred to this card. As a quick effect, you can detach 2 materials from this card and then send all other cards from the field to the graveyard. And then once per turn, if another card you control is destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you can attach 1 card from your hand, deck, or your extra deck to this card as material. Basically, as long as this card can keep a steady stream of material, most of the time this card will have about 2 material, but it does give you an instant board wipe that is very hard to interact with, thus leaving you with a card with 3,000 attack and defense that can either act as a wall or as a way to hit into your opponent for big damage. But that is all I have for this deck profile. I really hope you enjoyed, as this deck is still experimental, but it is a lot of fun and allows you to perform a wide array of Xyz summons, and cards like Gemini, Ablation, and Hydron Hawk will trigger any of your Dark World cards to allow you to extend your plays. And also, I apologize for the different sleeves on these cards. I will make sure to get them in matching sleeves here soon, but hope you look forward to more deck profiles and possible test hands in the future. And until next time, signing out.